Indigenomics. It's a phrase coined by Carol Ann Hilton, CEO of Transformations International. Carol Ann was recently appointed to the Federal Economic Growth Council, one of 14 members, the only Aboriginal member. She does regular speaking engagements, has many other successes to her credit, and is currently authoring Indigenomics, the emerging global power shift. Welcome, Carol Ann. Thank you for being here. What is Indigenomics?
Thank you. It's good to be here. Indigenomics is an emergence of my thought around the importance and significance of Indigenous people and original economy, our values, perspectives, world beliefs, and how that must continue into the future of what it means to be Canada.
That sounds huge. What is the impact that you're looking for?
The impact has been basically to build a bridge of understanding between where Canadians are in a spectrum of understanding Canadian history, the role of First Nations, and building bridges to how important First Nations are to the future of the Canadian economy.
I'm going to back up. You got a phone call, was it March 11th, from Ottawa, appointing you, asking you to sit on the Economic Growth Council, advising, one of 14 advisors to the federal finance minister. What went through your mind in that moment?
It was like a time collapse of recognizing where and what my grandparents' experience was, my parents' experience, and my experience, and being able to have an opportunity to bring a voice to what is important today in 2016.
That voice is your voice. How are you using that voice?
As a first generation out of residential school, my parents went to residential school, my grandparents went to residential school. I feel a deep responsibility to be able to relay what is an Indigenous worldview, build entry points to its continued relevance today, and that includes that reconciliation around how do Canadians understand First Nations beliefs, values, principles, business systems, approach to economy, and relevance into the future.
Do you think we are beginning to understand what those concepts are? And I'm going to ask you to shed light on what is an Indigenous way of thinking.
Absolutely, yes. I believe that is happening, and I believe there's a large proportion of the Canadian population that is asking, what does this mean? How do we reconcile our past, our current situation, and our future? Mm-hmm. And I also believe we're living with a government that is beginning to identify the need to learn what this means and how is it relevant and what is the application.
And that's being shown by appointments such as yours.
I believe so.
The impact that you're looking to make is huge. There's a lot of small parts that make up the whole. Are there moments when you think that it's just too big?
No, I do not have those moments where I believe it's too big. I believe that each piece, there's a legal history in Canada that as piece by piece, as First Nations begin to be awakening to how do we apply ourselves of who we are into the future, that relationship with Canada, with the Canadian economy, with business and corporation change and shifts. So what we're dealing with is a shifting landscape of relationships with First Nations. Mm-hmm. And that is an example, I believe, is so important that we stay in tune with that shift, and that shift is really what and how we will experience Canada in the future in relationship to First Nations people.
Shift means a lot of change, a lot of uncertainty, and you've become comfortable in that shift because you know the result is going to be valuable, not just for our lives, but the global picture. I've heard you say that your ancestors prayed you into your own existence, and that you carry a lot of that responsibility in living up to the efforts of their prayers. And correct me if I'm paraphrasing incorrectly. How do you think that we can pray for what we want to see in our futures, following in the steps of what your ancestors did to create your existence? What can we learn and what can we do?
I believe that's very much focusing on a future that we want, that's being able to identify how do we engage with each other as human beings, and in that engagement, what are the values and principles and relevance that is important in a relationship, and our ability to find our own leadership in that facilitation, I believe, is one of the most important things. And when we can focus on that, that simplicity is where that prayer focus is. How do we continue into our future, and what do we want that to look like?
I'm going to ask for specific examples. When you're interacting, how are you putting those values forward in meeting with me here today, in going out for breakfast with family? Because it's the little steps and the everyday actions that contribute to the bigger picture. So how are you putting that into practice?
Absolutely. I like that idea that we can be busy or we can have priorities. So we're never really very busy. We only have the priorities in our lives. So I very much pay attention to what are the priorities in my life. Are these conversations that I need to be having, or could I be having other conversations? So I pay very close attention to the conversations that I have, the way that I spend my time, and how important is that to be able to build relationship, to be able to understand my own history, to understand my relevance to the work that I'm doing, and to be able to build my understanding and have a clear voice in that.
Okay. We'll be back with more from Carol Ann Hilton after this. We're back on set with Carol Ann Hilton, CEO of Transformation International and a recent appointee to the Federal Economic Growth Council, the only Aboriginal of 14 to sit on that council. She was appointed in March. On the website, Transformation International, there's a quote, and I'm going to read it to you now. Every time you are tempted to react in the same old way, ask if you want to be a prisoner of the past or a pioneer of the future. That's a quote from Deepak Chopra. And I have to ask you, Carol Ann, how do you resist the temptations to repeat patterns in thinking or behavior?
Absolutely. So as the first generation out of residential school, it is important to me to live my center of who I am in happiness and joy. And in that center, I have to be consciously aware of the patterns that, the negative patterns that have emerged as impacts of residential school, impacts of colonization that I've experienced directly as an Indigenous woman, removal from our families or languages or any of those areas within our culture and family life. And my purpose and existence to be able to live in joy and happiness, I believe, again, when you referenced that my ancestors prayed for me specifically to go into the future, and I believe they prayed for my happiness, for my safety, for my well-being, and that I could exist in the emerging future as a happy, whole individual. So I believe very much that if I keep my ancestors' prayer close to me, that I'm better equipped to be able to do that. And then that assessing how equipped am I to be reacting in this moment, so I can look at it from a limited perspective, or I can look at what increasing my options and choices in how I live my life. And I believe that's what I bring into my work as transformation within my company and within my approach to work.
Are there daily practices that you do to keep this at your core?
I believe so. I think being aware of what my state of being is, coming from a place of happiness, the activities that I participate in, the movies I watch, the conversation I have, how much focused are they on happiness and well-being, or how much are they focused on either negative things or things that kind of facilitate less than my own wholeness.
What makes transformation possible? And we're talking about transformation not only on an individual level, but a global and community level as well. What makes it possible? What has to be in place?
So I look at transformation from a cultural perspective. So I come from a rich, deep tradition that transformation is a core value, that even recognizing that from a cultural perspective, seeing transformation as a value.
I've never heard of transformation being labeled as a value before. It's always a process. We think of it as something that we go through.
So basically, I see transformation as something that is able to expand possibility, expand options, bring awareness. Our dances, our songs, our ceremonies often have transformation at the core of them from a cultural perspective. So seeing that from my own worldview and being able to, what does transformation mean today in the work that I do? That's very much in the communities that I work with. It's about being able to facilitate a positive state of being. And that state of being can also be that knowledge that it's not only possible, but also that there are more options than we can use. And that is my operating point, that I can say there's 4 options, I don't like any of them, or I can look at there's more options than I can possibly use, and operating from that as a state of being, that which option do I choose and how do I choose that and how do I facilitate that from who I am.
Do you reach out to mentors, to a support network to help you see some of the options that are available?
Absolutely, and I completely enjoy that. When you come across a situation, you're just like, this is the only option, or you're just like, it's not a very great option, and then you have another conversation with someone, they're like, well, did you think of this? And you're like, no, I didn't think of that at all. So expanding awareness and expanding options and being able to choose, that's a kind of a freedom that I believe transformation is based on, and that happens at an individual level, a family level, a community level, and governance and administration as well.
Sometimes I like to ask people how they define success, but it's hard to do that if there's no end. Mm-hmm. And when we're talking about transformation being a value, it doesn't stop. So how do you know that you're succeeding?
Within the work that I do in communities. I believe that is facilitating, again, that positive state of being, that when you can acknowledge what are the underlying objectives. So if community members are asking questions and maybe possibly they're negative, or who's to blame, or who's at fault, or being able to facilitate what is the underlying objective. I need more information, I need to understand, I need to participate. Facilitating from those objectives, that's when you can shift that state of being, have positive participation, and look at that as success that people feel. I feel differently. I feel like I want to be part of this. I feel like we are creating change, and I can see myself in that future.
Okay, we'll be back with more from Carol Ann Hilton. Carol Ann Hilton is from the Hesquiat Nation. She grew up in foster care in the Chemainus area on Vancouver Island. In preparing to welcome you here today, I went online and I did the research, and I heard in one of your talks about asserting humanity. And what does that mean when you say that, asserting your own humanity?
I really like the concept of asserting my humanity, because I've always grown up, especially being raised in care, having the feeling not only that I came with my own distinct perspective, that I came with my own worldview, and I had my own way of seeing things, that recognizing through being in care that I was the possibility of being able to bring a voice to what my experience was, how I understood the separation that existed within my family. For example, my mother had 5 children, was unable to raise any of those. So all of those, my brothers and sisters were raised in care, and that's really a fallout of residential school and colonialism. My participation in that is I really was aware that I could respond in anger, I could respond in being despondent to the system that I was raised in, but instead education became a value to me, that if I was able to understand business or understand administration or all these other kind of schools of thought, that my ability to bring a voice to the structures and the abilities of our people to not only have a rightful role in the place within the world, within our country, that was also a facilitation of my ability to assert my humanity. So my humanity is really based on equality, dignity, justice. Those assertions support that facilitation of the transformation work that I do in community. So that assertion of humanity to me is really about being able to bring a voice to the experience that, you know, my mother had, my grandmother had, that my ancestors had within the development of this country.
I don't think it's usual for someone going through the foster care system as an Indigenous person to find that strength and have that strength to follow the purpose that you're following and to walk in the humanity. Where do you think that came from? Was there a moment? Was there something that just pushed and triggered you to say, I am doing this the way I feel it needs to be done?
I believe that education was a way for me to be able to focus on, to be able to remove the distractions of otherness. That most important to me was reconnection back to who I am, to my family, to my community.
How lost was that?
How lost was that?
How lost was it? How far did you have to go back to reconnect, or was it sort of always there?
It was always there, daily, kind of constantly. And amazingly, the first job that I ever had ended up being for an aunt down in Chemainus that connected me back to my family and connected me back to my culture. So it was something that was, I've always kind of, these things have led me in my life to be where I am today. And I believe every kind of experience that I've had as a Heshkwit person, as an Indigenous woman, has been able to facilitate me having a voice and being able to facilitate transformation today.
And you've acknowledged that and seen it and embraced it as a path that is there for you to walk on. Thank you for being here today. We have what we call Power Bites. We have a golden turtle on our set, and we're going to ask you now to pick a quote from there and read it for us. And we will just end our conversation with a thought, with a Power Bite. You got two. Maybe there's double messaging here.
Harnessing our ultimate PowHER as women means tapping into those pieces of ourselves that perhaps we have forgotten. It's time to remember what brought you your greatest joy, pull that thread through.
I think that's a pretty good encapsulation of what we've done here today and the story that you're living. Thank you.